Welcome, everyone. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from Adriano Fuorivia, a seasoned tennis coach with over 25 years of experience in nurturing young talents and guiding players on the professional ATP tour and developing young tennis players. Adriano currently lends his expertise as a high performance tennis consultant for Advantage Tennis International at the VTC. Perhaps most impressively, he played a fundamental role in the development of Denis Shapovalov, who reached a career-high ATP ranking of number 10. Adriano's deep understanding of the sport and his commitment to developing each athlete's potential make him a respected figure in the tennis coaching business worldwide. Let's dive into the insights and experiences Adriano has to share with us today. Adriano, thanks for being with us today. Can you share what inspires you to educate the parents and to share your expertise on this long tennis journey for their kids?
Thanks, Eddie. First and foremost, I know it's a very complicated journey. However, I've had quite a lot of experience in developing young talents and trying to get them up to the ATP. And I'm happy to be here to share my philosophy and things that I thought worked for me, and as well as to ensure that it is a fun journey, and to have a little bit of patience and just enjoy the ride.
It is clearly a challenging path for kids as much as it is for parents, right? What do you say to commend and to praise the parents that are actually fully committed to this development, to their development, and they're invested in every single way?
I really do want to commend the parents as the amount of time, money, just endless hours of their commitment. They're fully sacrificing to, give their child the best chance to, one, play tennis, and, with the potential of trying to become a professional. I know it's not easy, but, it takes up a lot of weekends, takes up a lot of times. There's no vacations. But it really is, I can really appreciate it because seeing it day in and day out and seeing it over all the years, I really think that it's something special. And I really hope that, their players, their kids really appreciate what they do for them.
Would you say that mental toughness on behalf of the kids and mental toughness, resilience from the parents' point of view is an important aspect as well? Or
I think it's definitely important. I do want to say, at a time right now that we're in, I feel that kids are a little bit more mentally softer for many, many reasons. One, I believe, or I think that, parents sometimes make their kids soft. They have the opportunity to give their kids many things that they couldn't have when they were children. I also think, we're in a time of age where everything's on social media, and kids are just kind of worrying about their image or how they look or if they're liked and so forth. And I think it just becomes very, very mentally tough on the kids, which kind of stunts their development as well. So I think it has to go back to kind of old school, and it's just work hard. The expectation is to work hard, and there should be consequences to not doing that, but that's about it.
you mentioned social media. How do you think social media is affecting both parents and kids? Because obviously parents are going to be on social media and seeing the results and seeing what's being thrown out there by the competition. How do you think this is going to affect both?
Well, firstly, I think for the player, it's basically having hundreds, thousands of extra eyes on you. So they must feel the pressure to look good, to to have to post wins, things that are super, super positive. But when we know that, one kid wins a tournament, I also think, the kids looking at other kids posting and seeing all this adds a lot more pressure. It's more in their face on a day-to-day basis. With regards to the parents, there's a lot of fakeness out there in the social media world. I feel that they can, one, be sold on this fake image that's out there. There's many profiles, where people say that they're experienced but are not, or as well as it's just seeing on a daily basis other kids winning tournaments and so forth, which can then bring kind of a negative downfall on the pressures that they put on their own child. So I think it just adds to the pressure of both parents and the children.
Makes sense. What would you say is the best solution in that regards? How can they isolate themselves from all the noises, all the clutter from the social media?
Simply put, get rid of social media.
Makes sense.
Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. I think number one, I think it's important that parents, up until a certain age, just run their children's social media, or maybe help them with it. They can also help them avoid or teach them, through what they're seeing and so forth. So maybe it's like an education way of going through or looking at social media. I think for the parents as well is to just look at social media in terms of, or what's on there in terms of like just positive things and what they can look at to learn from it, versus using it to like compare their child with others. Easily said, but if there's a way, or if they can realize that could be possibly happening, that maybe they can kind of get better at that.
Makes sense. Let's talk about excuses. I'm sure you've heard some phenomenal excuses through your career. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I have to say, my line is, I'm not in the business, and I think it's important to teach the young players that no matter what, there's no excuse. Whether they've played opponents and there were so many bad line calls, or the referee wasn't on their side, or the type of ball that was used, or I always get tough draws, I always get a seed. And I think if parents feed into that more, which I do see a lot, and it's probably not done purposely, but I think it just adds to the player having excuses versus, them having to fight through and learn how to problem solve on their own no matter what, and make themselves tougher mentally. So I really believe, one, the parents' role in this is hugely important. And myself as a coach, I've never taken an excuse. I never will accept it. I will call the kids up on it. And I think in combination, if the parents are on the same page, I think it can make a big difference in just having that player develop with a mentality of no problem. It's an even better challenge for me, and I can develop faster, and it's going to make me more mentally tougher.
That's great. I know for a fact that you emphasize solution-based thinking. Can you develop more? Can you expand more on that? Like, how can that help the kids develop better? How can they accept more the challenging aspect of their growth and their journey?
Well, as a coach, I like to purposely put them in situations where they're either uncomfortable. I like to say, the player is going to become comfortable being uncomfortable. So I like to put them in a lot of scenarios where they are uncomfortable, and with the goal of them having to find ways, knowing that I will not accept any excuse. It's something that should be done over and over and over again. I don't think we do it once. I think we continuously do that, because with the sport, the environment changes. The conditions change, outdoors, indoors, windy, different balls, different types of opponents. So I think it's important to keep teaching the psychological side of dealing with everything, dealing with adversity, and enjoying that part of the sport, because they will become much better tennis players if they can own that.
Makes total sense. Is there such a thing as too much challenge?
Very good question. I can answer with a yes and a no. I do think that at different stages and different ages, the players can handle less or more. I do think it's something that depending on the player, how they are, that maybe it could be, challenges as they get a little bit older each time, become a little bit more tougher, a little bit more tougher. You know, they become resilient as they develop, and I think we can help them become even tougher. But I do think each child is different. Their mentality is different, and that has to come from the coach. The coach has to know their player, work with them, know how far they can push them to limits where like sometimes they're about to break, bring them back down, and then keep challenging that boundary.
That's great. We know for a fact that playing tournaments is a race to chasing and getting points. If it's on a local tournament point of view, if it's on the ITF tour, if it's on the ATP, WTA, everybody's chasing points. How can kids and parents deal with the pressure of an unlucky draw or the fact that you're not always going to have a favorable path to winning?
I think it's important to understand that number one is you have to be able to beat everybody in the draw to win the tournament. Now, you won't play them all, but at some point you have to get through, whether it's a top seed, unless you're the top seed, and you're coming through everybody. So it's about being the person in front of you that day. So it's mentally preparing or being mentally prepared to just go up against who's in front of you that day, find a way to beat them, and bring your tennis level up each time. With regards of point chasing and so forth, we see it happen many times. I'm not a big fan of it. I understand getting your first few, let's say ITF points to come up to, so then you get into tournaments, or getting your first few, ATP points, so then you can get into other tournaments. But in the end, your level is your level. Yeah. When you hit and play the real tournaments, it doesn't make a difference which points you have or not. What makes a difference is the level that you're able to bring. Are you at the level of a top 1,000 junior? Are you at the level of a top 500 junior? And, keep going down the list, top 100, top 50. If you got your points from, easy tournaments and so forth, you're gonna be looking at disappointment down the road.
Yeah. In your opinion, what should the parents look for in a coach? What are the qualities, the attributes that a coach should have?
I think it's important for parents to find a coach that, number one, kind of forms a bond with their child, a coach who's highly dedicated, a coach who's always there, a coach who has a belief in the child. Of course, very knowledgeable of the sport, possible proven track record. Depends at which age. Sometimes it's not possible right in the beginning, but I think a more dedicated coach is way more valuable than just someone who has a lot of experience but doesn't really give or have the time to spend and the patience to spend with their child.
Do you value more in a coach the playing qualities or their ability to instill discipline and to bring the level of the kids up through their knowledge?
It's way more valuable for a coach that instills the discipline, that's teaching them proper technique tactically, that's working with their mind at the same time, pushing them physically. I do think solid players can make great coaches as well, but I do think coaching is a bit of an art, and it takes some learning to be able to work with a young player while their mind is developing, and as they're gaining all this valuable experience, in order to reach their best level of play.
Yeah. Most kids will spend, especially in the early stage of their development, will spend a lot of time in an academy environment. What should the parents and what should the coaches look like in that setting?
I think an academy for the kids is a very important part of a player's development. As number one is there's many other kids in the academy. I think it's once parents and the child, once they have a coach selected, that afterwards while they're in the academy, they're really using other kids to, one, just build relationships with, two, to be able to spar with, there's kids of many different levels, kids of many different playing abilities and game styles. I think it's very important that if the academy is able to provide a solid group base for them, I think it's very important, as I believe that, I would say just about on average cases that group training is about half of, the weekly playing hours for a junior. So I think it's important that, that the philosophy of the academy, and that instills hard work and dedication, sacrificing, giving your best at all times, along with, the coach that they've selected, working hand in hand. I think it's, it's the recipe for success.
So is trust an important factor in this case between the parties involved, between the parents, the player, coaches, the academy director, in this case, in your opinion?
100%. I think it's important that once the trust is there and it's set, that then it's just constantly shown, or the child must feel that everybody's on the same team, and the team is there for him or her to succeed, at all times.
Should the parents micromanage? Should the coaches micromanage? What are your opinion? What is your opinion?
I think each coach, player, and parent should all have accountability for certain things that they're responsible for. Once there's trust, once a parent and a child has trust in a coach, they should fully trust that coach to give the best into developing their child. The coach should be trusting the parents as well to say that, I should be trusted, and so forth. And I feel like just not being questioned. However, a parent's role is, parents have the most important role. First of all, they're with the child at all times. They're growing up their child. They're sacrificing, bringing their child to and from tennis, to and from tournaments, weekends. They have to juggle all that with work and with other children, other siblings. It is not an easy role. But the number one role, after I think they find a coach and that they trust, is to just help get their child doing all the things, getting to and from tennis. But as well as there may be certain things that, at home, are they sleeping on time? Are they doing the extra stretching? Are they doing, some of the homework assignments that the coach may have left for the player, whether it's watching some videos, taking some notes? So I think it's important that they don't take any parts of the role of the coach, but rather support some of the work that the coach may ask the player to do when the coach cannot see what's happening at home.
That's great. That's great advice. You mentioned earlier challenge. Do you have an ideal time for training, or do you think that adding variety to the training setting, to the training hours, if it's early morning, late evening, that could benefit the kid's development?
In my experience, or in my philosophy, I don't believe there should be any set times. There shouldn't be perfect times. We're not in a perfect world. You can't always have training at a certain time. You can't always find court time at a certain time. You can't always have your private lessons with your coaches at a certain time, as a coach has many players. There's a lot of restrictions, with the court and so forth. I'm a believer of, you get a lesson, 10 p.m., you take it. You have a 6 a.m., you take it. 3 in the morning, you take it. Not realistic. Yeah. However, it's part of being all in. And all in is, we're here to do whatever it takes. And we'll take whatever's possible for us. Now, again, does that mean every lesson is going to be at 9 or 10 p.m.? Or every lesson at 6 in the morning? No. But I think it's important to just, for the players to be able to adapt, train at certain times, different times. As in tournaments, you could be playing as early as 8 in the morning, which means your warm-up could be at 6 a.m. Some tournaments finish late. whether it's on the junior circuit or even on the pro tour. So if we're going to try to have the kids train in such a perfect environment, it doesn't work that way. That's not the reality of tennis. I like to compare also tennis with like hockey. Hockey, the team has team practice at 6, 7 a.m. They're there. Late practice, dry land training, whatever, the whole team has to be there. One person's missing, they're benched. They have a contract with that team. They can't change teams. They are stuck with that team. Once they're onto a team for a year, they're stuck with it. So I think it's important that, like, I feel like tennis should be treated the same way, because if you have that philosophy of this is how it works, we're gonna work at this and work at different times, do this, do that. I think it's so important that buying into this, everyone together is trying to make things work in the end for that junior player, for that young player. So I think it also helps them, go through adversity. Nothing's perfect. Being able to problem solve, waking up early, having to be focused at such an early time. Later practice, they might have had school that day, long day. Are they able to bring the focus? It's just another. If it's looked at as a challenging opportunity, I think it's so valuable for the child's development.
How important is adaptability for a tennis player? And we can talk about younger developing players or ATP players.
I think you could add in almost any athlete of any sport. I really think that most of the players, most of the kids, they come into, even if they come into adults, they train, they put the number of hours in, tennis wise, physically, mentally, but if mentally they can't adapt to every situation, it could be rain delays. You might not play for a day or two. You might not have a warm up court in the morning. It's windy, different tennis balls. You go to a tournament and your racket's not strung to your liking, and it all becomes difficult. And all of a sudden, if that's it, if they're not able to get through that, well, then they're just giving a free round, they're taking a loss, and free points. It could be free ranking points at the time. Could be free, could be money. That match win could have been their next room at a hotel for the next night, and so forth. So it really all makes a big difference, and they have to be able to just find a way to adapt in any situation. But again, it comes from starting at a young age, working all the way up to the pro. I think if it's not taught at 10, 11, 12, then we shouldn't expect them to have it at 20 or 21, 22. It's all part of a slow development.
You mentioned earlier trust. At what point, if the player doesn't trust the coach anymore, or the parents don't trust the coach anymore, or the academy setting in which they're training, at what point is it better for them to go on separate ways?
I think it's a great question. I think it happens. I don't know if you can say often, but it does happen. I think a few factors should be looked at. Number one, I do believe the player's personal coach is the most important thing. I think everything should evolve around that. If there seems, players and coaches break up for many reasons. A very simple reason can be just sometimes they just fall apart. They drift apart. Not even done purposely. Maybe just a lack of motivation. Maybe just not working well together. Also, there's certain coaches that are very good in certain stages. There's some really, really good young, developmental coaches. There's some coaches that are very good in the young teen development right through juniors, the junior ITFs. There's coaches that are just really, really good on the pro tour, but don't have a grasp of developing and making certain technical changes to develop a player. So, and for the most part, it's usually one coach doesn't have it all. So I think there's many instances where it can happen, but I feel like, number one, if the player is not feeling the same thing with the coach, and vice versa, if the coach is not feeling with the player, I think it's important to just have that conversation, say, we're not the best fit. They could possibly move to another coach in the academy if that's an option at their club. But down the road, I think if that pillar is not working well, they find the pillar again to work around the coach, because the coach can then set the environment for them. Academies are all about the environment, working hard, discipline, and so forth. A good coach can turn any academy environment into something of, solid learning, solid challenges for a player, even if the levels of the player are not all equally the same. So I think it's just once it comes down to the personal coach not really working well, maybe it's time to change coaches, maybe another academy, maybe the philosophy of the academy is not working with them. Maybe the academy is asking for too much commitment, and maybe the parents of the player, or the player's just not willing to put that kind of commitment in. In the end, it's all about commitment. The player's got to commit to something, the belief of the coach in the academy, and maybe the coach might feel that commitment level is not there. I know through my own personal work, and I've been blessed to work with many committed players and parents. I've been very fortunate, but it's an all-in mentality, and it's the only way I know. And the kids that I've coached, that I've been around, it's the only thing that they've known, and I feel like it's just so much easier and amazing to be a part of, because every single person is sacrificing and doing that. So, there's also one more thing I want to mention. It happens often, whether there's panicking, whether there's a lot of talking and so forth, but the grass isn't always greener on the other side. I will say, I'm confident to say 80 to 90%, it is never greener on the other side. However, there are times for making changes, and if the time is right, I think it's important to find another coach, whether it's in a club, whether it's in a different academy. I think it's important to first kind of find that cornerstone, that new relationship, where then the player can take off again. Because I feel that what happens is the players do get really hurt. They just get hurt by the development phase. They lose 2 months, 6 months. Sometimes a new coach, they can lose a year by the time the learning and the figuring out, and the coach learns the mental side of the player and how to work with them, as every player is different. So there's a time for everything, but I just recommend making sure that it's not just panic or just a feeling or a bad day or a bad week, that it's something that over time it's been noticed that it just doesn't seem to be working. I think an honest conversation can happen between the parent, coach, and player, and academy director if needed. But I think at that point there'll be a good understanding, and then it'll give guidance as to which direction to go.
How much should results influence the choice in sticking with the coach or not? Because a lot of times what happens is that results don't follow, even though things tend to progress in the right direction from a coaching point of view.
Well, if I said results don't matter, then I'd be lying. I think in sport, it's results based for the most part. Again, it also depends on the age of the athlete. I think at a younger age, and again, all kids mature at different ages. I think they don't. They shouldn't matter. It should be about long-term athlete development. It should be about ensuring that they're getting better at the 4 pillars. What we call is technical, tactical, physical, and psychological. And I think parents and coaches together should be looking at those 4 pillars, and is there improvement? Is there always constant improvement in those aspects? As it's easy to jump or to panic, to jump ship when results aren't coming right away. I'll give you an instance. Like some players have 3 to 5 really, really good weeks a year of playing, and that keeps their ranking in the top, whatever in the province, top whatever in the country, top whatever, ITF juniors, and even you have pros that have 5 amazing weeks, and they could be top 50, top 40 ATP, WTA. I think it's important not to panic. Again, I've been fortunate enough to be around parents who actually haven't panicked, and we're all into the positives and looking at things. But I do see the side of panicking. I panic myself, and I think it's important to understand what's happening. Results is the results just because they're the coach and player are putting in the right work together, or is it as well as you got to look at the psychological side of their child, of the player, and sometimes there's a lot of things holding back, wanting to impress the parents, wanting to impress the coach. They want to win on their own. They don't know how to deal with losing. Winning is too important, and why they feel that way. I think it's more of finding an understanding of figuring out why why this could be happening and so forth. So shortly put, I don't think it should just be results based, especially from anywhere from 7 to 14, 15 years old. As long as there's a development in something, there will be times where maybe a player might need to hear a different voice, and that's when possible change is necessary, because the coach at some point becomes almost like a parental figure. There, the players spend more time with the coach, and just like young teens eventually stop listening to parents, or that tough age, it becomes the same with the coach, and it just kind of stunts development.
You mentioned the different voice. What's your opinion on kids working with multiple coaches, or having people that, like, coaches that are not in the same academy environment, and they're contributing to the player's development?
I love the question. I've seen it happen so much, and for me, it's a complete no. I feel like it's a lot of information, and for the most part, a lot of different information that the child's receiving, and it could be very, very confusing because the same message is not being sent. And for the most part, in most cases, it's eventually, well, who's taking ownership of the child? And myself as a coach, well, if I know that a player is going to be going somewhere else, it was like, do I take ownership? Do I not? And I think that's where relationships can be hurt. However, there are cases where it can work. I do think it's more important if it can work in the same academy environment, where there's always just another pair of eyes, a trusted pair of eyes that works together with the coach. Doesn't make the coach feel, scared or with his back up to the wall, his or her back up to the wall. I think it's important to just, and I've done it many times where I ask people that I trust, what do they think of this? What do they think of that? And I have certain specific things that I ask them to look at. I think it's super important to do so, because I do think that second pair of eyes, maybe a third pair of eyes, 99% of the time is needed. But it's just how it's done. Again, if it's done with a team that's all together where they're communicating, it's going to be great. But if it's done at different academies and different coaches, there's a very, very high chance that they're all communicating together. And I think that just hurts the development of a child once again. So second pair of eyes, yes, a must, but through a trusted source, through other coaches, high-level coaches. I've also done it myself, being on the road, being on the junior tour, on the men's futures tour. At the time when I was, going through it with Denis, but I found a respectable coach who had great experience, and I was never afraid to ask questions. I've been lucky. They've been very good to me. They gave me some great advice. They gave me tips. I'm like, carte blanche, just let me know, what do you think is needed to be worked on? And usually what I did is I've asked 2, 3 coaches, and whatever whatever they all said was the exact same information. If it was similar, whatever was similar, I used the number two. If two out of the three said something that I thought that they thought had to be worked on, I right away put it in my notes and I went to work on it.
We talked about training, academy setting. What individual lessons, one-on-ones, semi-privates, what would you consider purposeful practice? What is quality training for you?
It means that every time that they're on the court, that a player is on the court, that something's being worked on. So, for example, court time and more court time isn't necessarily going to do any good. In fact, it'll probably do much more harm than it will do good if there's not purposeful practice. If kids are just on their own but don't really have a focus, or maybe some parents might force them to play more hours because they think it's more important. But again, if it's really not set up in a way where they're working on something, now occasionally once they're all going out and having fun and playing with a friend, great. I think that's very important as well. But I think that in their academy setting, in their group training with their coaches and semi-privates, obviously they're working on a specific thing. And I think it's just important that every time they hit a tennis ball, that there's meaning behind the ball they hit.
Makes sense. In relation to that, how important do you think is a training plan? Having a yearly training plan, a multiple year training plan from a long-term athlete development point of view, how important do you think that is for young developing athletes?
And we're saying, like, let's say 12 years old and up?
We're saying 12 and 12.
Yeah, I think almost under 12, you can start a little bit having somewhat plans. Because then I believe then it's just maybe too structured at the time for that age. And they're learning a lot of, basic fundamentals, which then they can take them to the next level. I do think once they're 12 years old and above, I think a yearly tournament and training plan is super important. I think there's certain blocks and certain times for working on certain aspects of a player's games. And when you know their important tournaments, you can work backwards from there to ensure that there's enough time to work on certain things, but they're able to peak when they really want to perform their best.
Would you say that there's with so many tournaments being added every week to the calendar, would you say that the training blocks are getting smaller and smaller? Like players have to adapt even more?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's the ATP or the WTA players, they're complaining about they barely have an off season, and which means their vacation cuts into their off season, which then isn't as long as it should be or could be, and then it's right back into it right away. So I do think that you got to be able to adapt and do things in certain ways, but I do think you should, as a young developing junior, I think it's important to just find times where even if there's tournament play, but they're tournaments that aren't so important, so that the players can still work on it could be a tougher phase, it could be a more intense phase, yet knowing they're going into their tournaments not fully optimized, for having their best chance to win the tournament. But I do think it's important to have many blocks throughout the year. So training phase on the court, fitness blocks, and so forth.
Makes sense. We talked about challenge. Let's go back to challenge again. What's your opinion on kids constantly looking to play up, constantly looking to play with older, better, more experienced players?
Number one, I'll go from a kid's perspective.
Yeah.
It's much easier mentally for them to play someone of a higher level. They have nothing to lose. They play much more freely. So I think it's just psychologically, they think it's great for them, but I think backwards. I think number one, they get used to playing freely like that, but in reality, when they're playing their peers and when you're coming up through the rankings, you're playing your peers, and that's where the most pressure is. And I feel like they need to be better at doing that, because that's mostly that's the more realistic aspect of when they're playing matches and playing tournaments and so forth. So I think, occasionally playing up is okay, but also, and I also see, on a parent's perspective, they all believe that, their kids should be playing up, over all the years. In my 25 years of coaching experience, I've seen that, I've heard that. They don't realize the harm that it can do for their child. One, it's, again, just for the child to be able to play free and saying it's okay. Oh, I was playing a better player. That gives them a way out. Sure. On top of that, it's, playing a stronger player. The younger player, the weaker player is going to be on their back foot all the time. The ball is going to bounce in certain areas. More of a chance to get hurt. They're physically not ready for it. There's a lot of factors that should be considered. In my time as well, sometimes when you hit a certain level, you don't, we're in an environment you don't have better players to play with. And I always found that finding a player who trains hard on the other side, runs after every ball, and enjoys being on the court and adds to the environment is just as good as, it's actually better than finding, a top player. And I'm talking, 16, 17 years old, than just finding a top player to trade with. I think it's just important that you have somebody that's just going to get some balls back, work hard, and so forth. So I really think that that's, whether it's a myth or, parents, coaches think that that's the right way. I don't think so. And in a way I do it as well, as comparing it to hockey or soccer. The kids age up with each other. Now, in certain hockey or soccer, there's a special exempt. I know in hockey, I think it's been done like 5 or 6 times. And these are with special, talented athletes. In tennis, kids move up accordingly as well, but it's also, it's based on their tournaments. If they're doing super well, if they're into the ITF circuit and doing super well, that's a tell of that. Then they should be, training out.
Moving on to the fitness aspect, I know you're big on fitness. How should parents prioritize this aspect of the development of their kids' development? How much should they emphasize the fitness aspect of it?
Straight up, it's just as important as the tennis for me. It's not as many hours a week needed or dedicated for it, but the importance of the athlete becoming, more coordinated, being pushed off the court, adds to enjoyment of the sport, makes them they become more well-rounded. I think it's super important. I think, again, as they're getting older and older, it becomes even more important. And I do think there should be times in the training block, as we discussed, where tennis is not the priority. Fitness becomes a priority. And I think, having parents having a good coach that understands this, or they're in an environment where they can get a good understanding of this, I think it's super important, because it's tough to understand, the drawbacks of it immediately. But in a couple of years down the road, it becomes difficult. And once again, the athletes at certain ages and stages of their development, they're able to pick up certain things much faster. And if we prolong that, or if they get it at a much, if they learn something at a much later age and phase, well, it's tougher to learn, and sometimes they can't maximize that skill because it's eventually too late.
So based on what you were saying, do you think that there are certain phases and certain age, specific age that they can acquire skills better? Do you think that should be prioritized?
I think it's science-based, and I think 100% it should be.
Okay.
Kids learn motor skills at a very young age. Learning motor skills at 15, 16 is not the same as a child learning motor skills at 5, 6, 7, 10 years old. Speed comes, they're gaining speed, learning speed comes at a couple phases throughout their development. Strength, after puberty, for the most part. But I think that it's important as well as and being committed and being all in is putting in the time, doing the fitness. Fitness for the most part, I would say half to, maybe 3/4, depending on, on a teenager, should be in an environment where like they're being pushed and so forth. And I think, maybe a quarter to maybe half, the other half is like just fun sport, non-sanctioned sports, but, whether they're playing with their friends, whether they're, playing with their relatives, throwing, catching, jumping. I think that just adds to the overall, development. Maybe a fun basketball game just with friends at the park, or, a little football game, touch football game, something that just they acquire different athletic skills and abilities, which will then hopefully transfer onto the tennis court.
Makes sense. Commitment seems to be a very important part of every athlete's journey. How can parents show commitment towards the development of their kids?
Great question. Number one, it's when they're working together with the child, helping them find a coach. I think number one right there, helping them find an academy, a training environment that works well, that is that they believe in. Again, as I said, the most important role, like getting them to and from training, picking them up from school at early times, to get their lesson in, late nights, weekends at tournaments, missing vacations, juggling work and other siblings. Again, it's a huge role. I do think, although the kids might not show the appreciation, because when they're young, they don't really maybe understand what's going on. But I think as they get older, they then realized all the sacrifices and all the commitment that they got from their parents. So I think as well for the parents is to just understand that the thank you, hopefully if it doesn't come, while they're a young teen, it's going to come when they're older.
What about from an athlete's perspective, from a tennis player's perspective? How can they show commitment?
I say one thing: don't tell me, show me. Yeah. Actions are much more valuable. Actions show me a lot more. If you want to get better, let's see. You want to be physically better, stronger, whatever. Let's see you in the gym. You want to be sure that you're flexible. Let's see you always stretching and working on your exercises. Asking the coaches for things that they can do at home to help them recover or to be better. Working on the mental side of their game, watching matches, watching things. I'm not the biggest fan of watching just clips, as we're always shown the highlights. I think it's important to watch the in between. Not every point is a highlight reel. How the players manage their games and their sets and so forth. Showing up on time. On time is a half hour before every single time. I think listening to the coach. Working on the things, showing the coach that they're there to work on the things that they're doing in their lessons and so forth. It's what I call all in. And it's awesome to see. It's great to see. It's a pleasure to see like kids here dedicating themselves all the time. It's like school, tennis, bed, school, tennis, bed, school, tennis, bed. So I think it's a lifestyle. It's and I think for those that are the kids that love the sport, they would rather do nothing else. So, and that's why it's important to ensure that there's no added pressures to the winning, because as soon as they're giving all their time and doing all, giving everything they have, and all of a sudden it's just never good enough, then they will start to dislike it, and and eventually they could possibly just drop out when they're on their way and they have a path to become a very successful tennis player.
Yeah. We talked about social media. We talked about results. It's very easy for parents to fall into the trap of comparison.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to them? How can they avoid this? How can they stay away from it?
I've fallen into that trap many times. I'm going to say, please don't do that. It's just setting up for failure. It shows their child that they're just not doing good enough for the most part, or they have something to live up to. It shows, and from the parents' perspective, if they just keep comparing, it's always like nothing's ever good enough. It becomes a letdown. Look at so and so. They're doing this. You're right over here. The important thing is to not compare, but to understand that development and every child is different. Every child's mind is different. At some point, as long as they're working on the 4 pillars, technical, tactical, physical, mentally, that eventually when all those pillars come together, they're pretty much level, that the player's going to be able to perform at a much higher level. As long as they have to be ready for it, and they have to be motivated and not feel like they're letting anybody down. So, now comparing to future, stars on TV and so forth, that's different, to be able to, aspire to the next level, or kids coming to watch, a higher level tournament, to be able to compare, okay, this is what I think I have, this is what I need. But comparing to like their peers at all times, again, everybody develops, everybody wins at different stages. I've had many players where same age group, one develops much faster at one point, 6 months later, there's a catch up.
Yeah.
So it's again, it's not to panic. It's there's no race to developing. I don't believe you can speed up the mental maturity, the maturity of young minds, but I do believe they can be guided, guided strongly, and hopefully that then when they're ready, they're ready to achieve and play at much higher levels.
How would you say parents can sustain, support, continue to motivate and fuel the passion of their kids? Like, what would be your advice to them? How can they support them in this difficult and long journey?
I think if parents are constantly just ensuring that kids are enjoying giving their best, enjoying the learning, enjoying the battles, enjoying the tough times, not easy, but if there's a constant message of all that, and just saying, just keep giving your best, the work that you're putting in, the sacrifice that you're making, eventually they're all coming together. And again, it takes just sometimes a snap of a fingers, and an athlete comes through, and just all of a sudden, just the confidence gets high. They start just winning. They understand the level that they can play. But you don't win because of today. You win because of the work you put in 6 months, a year prior to that. And knowing and believing in this kind of system, I think, is a way that they can kind of just constantly share good conversations, at home and so forth, which leads me to a topic like in the car.
I was gonna ask you about that. So
Right. It's
that
just
car ride from practice or from a tournament, which could probably even worse.
the car ride from a practice or from a tournament, very difficult. The athlete is emotional. The parent could be emotional, sacrificing, putting in all the work. The child underperformed for whatever reason. The child lost for whatever reason. It's very easy to go the wrong way. It's not easy to say, hey, just keep it silent in the car, or pick a different discussion. But I encourage, if possible, to just not talk right away. Maybe wait 24, maybe wait a couple of hours. I think it's let the child kind of just get over the loss, and as a parent, just maybe you won't be as fired up, and maybe you'll be more calm, and then just having a discussion. You seem like you froze. What happened? Were you not able to play? What do you think stopped you from playing your best? I've seen you play better and so forth, but I think it's very, very tough. And I think if a parent can stay away from that and encourage the player to just talk to their coach, communicate, whether they're texting, calling at some point, go over the match and so forth. Because I think that if that happens on a consistent basis, again, it's going to just cause the player to just shut down and eventually not like the sport. So not easy to do, as everybody's invested, but I encourage to just try to find a different approach. Car ride home, the dinner tables, even after training. Hey, was your training fun? Ask different questions. Ask questions that allow them to express their tennis and what they've done in their way, where you're not leading them to certain things, but it just allows them to say, "Oh, I got to do this, I got to do that. It was a good time. It was a really tough session." Just where it allows them to describe their session in a way that's almost exciting versus asking questions that it's always about
Sure.
how do they do, how do they perform, and so forth.
Yeah. What's your advice on dealing with losing streaks? Like, most players go through them at a certain point in their career
Yes.
where they just don't seem capable of winning as they used to in the past or as they've done it. What's your advice on that from a parent's point of view?
From a parent's point of view, it happens. It happens often, and at every level, I've seen that. I think what's important to understand is a losing streak, for the most part, either you're playing too high levels of tournaments, but let's say it happens often, just at the right level of competition for their child. It does happen often, but it has to do with a lot of confidence, handling the pressures. Maybe they're feeling extra added on pressure from the coach, from the parents. Kids at a certain age have a certain amount of pressure themselves, where eventually it just becomes too much for them to handle. But in terms of the parent and the player sticking with it, knowing that the work they're putting in each day is the right work, and they're confident coming through that they're going to come through that, and it always happens. They will get through it if they stick with it. But to not give up, to not panic. I got players to many losing streaks. First round, win a tournament, quarterfinals, first round of qualies.
Yeah.
It is a part of our sport. But the great thing about our sport is every single week is another week, another tournament available to then have an opportunity to go perform at their best.
Makes sense. We talked about results, winning. We talked about just losing right now. What point do you think players should be competing internationally? What point do you feel like it's the right choice to say, I'm gonna choose to play ITFs, I'm gonna choose to play at a higher level?
For the most part, most countries have their own ITF events. We're in Canada, we have quite a few. I think we have over 20 junior events, which is amazing. So I think the kids can get a taste of it locally without having to go abroad. I think it's very, very important for kids to be able to show that they have the level to compete at home, in their province, in their country. If they're not performing in their province, in their country, there's a high chance that they're not going to perform internationally, because our country is just a small little sample of what's out there internationally. So I think it's important to show, the kids have to show that they're winning, or they have the ability to compete at a high level nationally before they go international.
Makes sense. You talked about level. What's your opinion on parents, players constantly check UTR, checking basically the opponent's ratings? What's your opinion?
You get another one on my I wouldn't call it a soft spot. I call it the opposite of just.
Is that an obsession? It becomes an obsession.
It's the rankings, the ratings, this UTR thing. It takes everybody out of the now. It also, you have a higher UTR, you should win.
Yeah.
Or, you have a much lower UTR, so you go in there and just play loose and go give it everything you have. I think there's a person on the other side of the net, and you're there that day to play that person on the other side of the net. Stop checking UTRs. I ban UTRs, just like I feel like I want to ban, social media. But I think it's just an added pressure or an added distraction.
Sure.
Of the now and what and who the player will play, that upcoming day, that week, and so forth. So the UTR is used for entering tournaments and so forth, certain tournaments in, I believe, the U.S., but it should not be a factor looked at whatsoever. I think, especially at a young age. I do understand colleges look at UTRs as part of that, and maybe in the last year of juniors when they're looking to, get a scholarship somewhere. I totally understand that, but in all this young development stuff, it just has to. It shouldn't even. They shouldn't even have an account. They shouldn't be able to even see the UTR.
It's a reason for a lot of panicking and a lot
of panicking, a lot of excuses, a lot of not being in the now.
Yeah.
So I think just please ban UTR.
We talked about going internationally just now. How can parents ensure that they're getting the right support from the federation, from their local, if it's the Canadian, if it's the Italian, if it's the U.S.? How can they ensure that they're getting the right support from their federation?
I would think it's important to understand, what kind of support are they receiving? I think it's important to receive support that's a complement, that complements the current development, all the work that's being done. Are they able to help a player and a coach together, with various different resources that they can provide? I think if the federation is able to do so and they show that they're there to help and assist and supplement in any way, I think it's great. At times, though, depending on federations, it's they support you in a certain way where it kind of stops the relationship and the development with their player and their current coach, who have built a relationship over years, and I think that can be hurtful for the child because they're going into a new coaching situation, into a new system, and again with all this new environment, it takes a long time to learn. It could stunt development for a while. So I think it's important to understand how the federation wants to help them. If they're there to help, to help the player and the coach, I think it's fantastic. I think if it's just say, hey, ship off your player to us and thank you, and bye. I'm obviously, as a coach, that personally hits me. However, there could be other times where it works, because if the player's coach is not able to travel a certain amount of weeks a year, but they're able to go to the federation and they go on tours and they have a travel coach, well, then I think it's something to consider. So it really all depends. Now, if the player's current coach and academy environment can help support and have coaches that are traveling to tours, well, then it's one thing. But again, it all depends on the coach. It all depends on the academy. It all depends on every situation is different.
Makes sense. You've been through the process with Denis, and turning professional has very, very low odds, right?
Yes.
How can and how should parents and young athletes approach the development process and truly benefit from this?
I think it's super, super tough to make it at the highest level of any sport, but I also think it's probably the most fun or competitive or just a great challenge to go for, to try and achieve. I'm a big believer in the sky's the limit. I believe in dreaming big, for the young athletes. But there has to, within reason of like just understanding that it is super tough, and the commitment level, sacrificing, the all in has to be there. But also for parents to understand that, it's very, very tough to make it at a high level, but to constantly support their child, to constantly give them every opportunity, which again, I commend them for doing that. Like, it's without the parents, the athlete has no chance, while us coaches don't have an opportunity to work with somebody to try to get them to the highest level. So I think it's just understand how tough it is, but also encourage the child to just keep giving their best, because you never know. You really never know, because, who knows how many athletes just stopped at a young age, didn't have the money, maybe we're discouraged, maybe we're in a tough situation, but they could have been very, very great athletes in our sport. So yeah, dream big, but be reasonable. Understand that it's long term. You got to stay in it. Not everyone's going to be a Carlos Alcaraz, a Coco Golf, just winning slams at 19, 20 years old. It's you prime in tennis could be 25 to 32 years old. So it's I'm looking now, and those that are sticking around over time and getting through, fighting adversity, finding ways. Those that were 400 or 500 in the world, they're breaking into the top 100 right now. They're getting into the Grand Slams. They're getting into the big tournaments, and I think it's because of not giving up. It's because they believed in something. They had people believing in them, their parents, their team, sponsors. I think it's special, and I think it's again, I have such appreciation for those that are giving themselves to the sport.
With tennis being such an expensive sport, and you meant, like, we talked about traveling, going internationally, how important do you feel the financial support and being able to sustain this journey is?
Unfortunately, this sport takes a toll financially, and not every child's family, not every family can afford, doing it properly, going through it properly. I want to say it's important to, parents have to have a mindset of, being committed to a certain amount financially. It's just the reality of what it is. Trying to find maybe sponsors, trying to find, I've seen parents, again, dedicated parents taking other jobs just to be able to help their children play. And again, I commend that, because it's that's how they show their kids that they're doing whatever it takes for them. And I think it inspires their kids to, like, just give their best, and every single time, and appreciate what they have.
Yeah.
So it's expensive, but finding ways to support their child in whichever way possible.
In every way possible. Adriano, thank you so much for taking time. It was great. Loved every minute of it, and it's great for you to share your experience with us. So thank you again. Really appreciate your time.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.